Welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. Atheist, agnostic, skeptic, freethinker, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural promoted from the podium. If that sounds good to you, you are probably in the right place. So I have just a couple of announcements before we get started with today's talk. First, if you like church and want to support us, there's a jar in the back of the room for donations. Those donations are only used for renting this room, in case you're curious as to where the money's going. Next Saturday at 3 o'clock at Browers in Fremont, we have our Saturday Secular Social, and everyone is invited to come out for that, so please join us. And next week, the service is going to be, the topic of the talk is why you should punch bunny rabbits. If that sounds interesting, please join us. All right, so I'm going to give a talk. This talk was by request. So during our planning meeting, somebody said they wanted to hear a talk on converting people to atheism. And so, and I had given a previous talk on Peter Boghossian's book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. If you're interested in that talk, you can look for it online. So this is a fresh one. Okay, so interestingly enough, as I talked to people about that topic, I got all kinds of responses, most of them negative. And that was just really interesting to me, because I think if I was a Christian and I was interested in inviting people to my church and all of that, I probably would not have gotten so much negative feedback. But why would we want to share atheism with someone? So I came up with 4 reasons, and they're really different reasons, so they're going to get different responses. And I've chosen to just focus on 4 different reasons. So one reason why I think you might want to convert people in your life to atheism is because you just want to share a common outlook with people about whom you care, right? To have more affinity. We'll talk about that. And then there are several that go under the category of preventing people from doing bad things in the name of religion. For example, killing or jailing non-believers or people of other faiths. Denying medical attention to children based on biblical promises of healing. Voting on issues differently than you think makes sense because they believe that there's some religious support for their particular view. So with that one, we're going to just focus on the correlation between climate change deniers and religion. Those are the 4 different scenarios where you would prefer that the person share your atheist point of view. And we'll talk about those. So let's say you have family and friends with whom you'd like to share your outlook on life. You want to have more affinity with them. In fact, you not only want to share your perspective, but you want them to agree with you. That's understandable. And the big reveal is they also would like it if you would agree with them. Okay? Nothing wrong with that. But you can't expect someone to be open to you and curious about what you believe and think if you're not open and curious about them. On the interpersonal level, you want to know, what do your friends think about God, besides saying that it exists, if they're believers? So our minds have evolved to believe in God. Since this is an atheist church, I'm going to double down on that, belabor it, and clarify that when I say God, I mean any God. Take Poseidon, for example. You can imagine being on a beach in ancient Greece. The earth rumbles a few minutes, and then later the tide recedes, and a wall of water 30 feet high comes crashing back. Oh, Poseidon! Why? Be natural. So you understand the real why has something to do with plate tectonics, and that became accepted thinking in the 1950s. But meanwhile, Poseidon had a lot to answer for. Our minds evolved that way. It makes it possible for us to understand that there are other minds out there, which is usually useful. If I'm out walking in the woods and I come across a mother bear with her cubs between us, it's helpful for me to be able to imagine that she has the same maternal instincts that I do. I need to be able to think about what might she be thinking in order to increase my chances for survival. And I get extra points for thinking about what she might be thinking that I'm thinking, so I can also address those concerns. We must think about what other minds think about. It's only that it's a misfire to think that there is a mind out there, a big mind, that is also thinking about us. I would add that we all need to love and be loved. And so it's amazing to create this relationship with something out there that loves me unconditionally and accepts my adoration. I can experience that kind of loving relationship with the divine. I began with this point because sometimes atheists say things like, people grow up believing whatever their parents believe. But it's man's relationship to the divine is greater than that. It's a relationship with the divine. No matter that it's actually a one-way street, but finding out what your friends and family believe about God will tell you a lot about him or her. Your family, friends, dates. What do these individuals think about religion, spirituality, God? This can be a nuanced discussion. Maybe they haven't had a chance to explore this topic with anyone. But you will miss the whole thing if your agenda is to change someone's opinion rather than to understand them and take your relationship deeper. Is your friend's relationship about love? She experiences God's love for her. She lives in gratitude for God that provides so much beauty in the world, so much comfort to people in need. This is a person who will show up in your life as someone able to give you praise and appreciation. Go with that and introduce her to effective altruism so that she can be an actual vehicle for compassion in the world. Does your friend focus on the fact that God is helping all that call on him to raise them up out of despair? Focus your connection on a shared vision for improving the world. A belief that God helps those that help themselves is not much different than that he helps them through people that help them, which is not much different from a belief that we need to be the change that we want to see in the world and not rely on the supernatural for help. Sometimes people put their faith in the idea that help will come from a supernatural source because they don't trust that it will come from people. But if you keep the lines of communication open and you hear someone say, "I'm praying for help," ask, "Is that true? What will help look like? How will you distinguish supernatural help from things otherwise working out from natural causes?" If your God is not a supernatural God, what is the point of using the word God at all? And sometimes people's belief in a supernatural God is that he is a God of the gaps. The only way that they can figure out how to bridge the gap between a bleak reality of something and a hopeful vision for something. God is the change maker in this scenario. But if you acknowledge that you too can identify the gap between how things are and how you wish them to be, but that if things can change, it is people that must change them, the things that truly are impossible without God's help may be impossible. And if your friend is a believer that just can't accept that, then marvel at her hopefulness. Nothing is impossible with God. God is the bit of magic that keeps the hope alive. And if you can accept that as your friend's belief, she may soften to your clear-eyed vision of reality and maybe even try on your glasses. So I think just people being in conversation with each other tend to start to calibrate to each other. So your friend may start to calibrate toward using more reason and less faith. What if you come across people who have a disturbing notion of God? So, trigger warning, sorry to have to bring up this really negative example, but I think it's appropriate. And you've heard it before anyway. So about 20 years ago, I had a coworker that I didn't know well tell me in the lunchroom at work that his son was dying of AIDS. And he was happy about it. Because God always keeps his promise to punish sin. Skin too. I don't know if there's ever converting a vile brute. Okay? Like, I'm not sure there's anything I could have said that would have made a difference. But let's say you were dealing with a more reasonable person who said they love the sinner. It's only the sin that they hate. Let me take a side note here and say that I know there are liberal Christians who will argue that there's no prohibition against homosexuality in the Bible. And I personally disagree. I think it's spelled out in both the Old and New Testaments. For examples, see Leviticus 18:22 and Romans 1:26. To quote, "You shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination." What do we expect from a book that's 2,000 years old? So ask the person why they think something is a sin. Because it's in the Bible? What about all the other rules that are also in the Bible? Any person who curses his mother or father must be killed. Women should not style or braid their hair or wear any adornments or fancy clothing. If a woman does not cover her head, let her also have her hair cut off. Now you may ask, if this is the revealed Word of God, how do they decide which bits to follow and which bits to ignore? Do not allow anyone to tell you that the bad things are only in the Old Testament, not in the New Testament. In the New Testament, it's all about Jesus' love for us. The commandment to love one another supersedes all the rules. Because there's plenty of bad stuff, anti-woman, pro-slavery passages in the New Testament. Timothy, Ephesians, Colossians. For example, Corinthians 34. Women should keep silent in church. 1 Philemon. Paul returns a slave to his master. Someone tells you that they believe in a loving God. They've been reading the Bible in church for years, but they have been carefully directed to all the nice bits. What I call the 23rd Psalm version of the Bible. Well, it's fine to say that you believe in that God, but do not call that the God of the Bible. For a true account of the Bible, one must look to the Bible. You might share with them Dan Barker's book, The Most Unpleasant Character of All Fiction, wherein there are chapters on each of the characteristics of God, the God of the Bible, with references to Bible verses, including that show his character to be jealous, vindictive, bloodthirsty, misogynist, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, slave-monger. Plus 20 other great things. Oh, terrible things. Don't want to be missing. Trying to tone down my sarcasm. This book was also written about 2,000 years ago, so what did you expect? Well, people like Plato, Aristotle, and Alexander the Great lived hundreds of years before these parts of the Bible were written. So maybe we could have expected more. What we require more than converting people to atheism is secularism and separation of church and state. that is what protects us against the tyranny of the masses. Maybe you think, I'm afraid because true atheists are a minority. Maybe 7% of the population are actual atheists. And I fear that religious people might trample my rights. 13 Muslim countries officially punish atheism or apostasy, how do you pronounce it? Apostasy by death. While the overwhelming majority of the 192 United Nations member countries discriminate against citizens who have no belief in a God and can jail them for offenses dubbed blasphemy. You may be afraid religious citizens may make poor decisions with regards to things, faith healing and climate change are the two that I'm going to look at here. So just last night we watched a video on Vice about called Hindustan, which was about Hindus in India attacking Muslims. So I want to point out that all religious tyranny is bad, whether it's against atheists or not. We need two things. We need separation of church and state, and we need the religious among us to value and uphold the separation of church and state. And I want to point out that religious people can believe in the separation of church and state. Your religious neighbor may well vote to protect your right to be an atheist. Let's look at the Baptist position on this. They support separation of church and state. The Baptist Joint Committee makes 5 points with regards to separation of church and state. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. First, some people claim that we don't have separation of church and state in America because those words are not specifically in the Constitution. So they go on about all kinds of words that are not in the Constitution that we read into the Constitution. The Baptists point to Roger Williams' quote, "The hedge or wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world." They point to Thomas Jefferson's 1802 letter to the Danbury, Connecticut Baptist Association, where he talks about sovereign reverence for a wall of separation. And the writing of James Madison, who observed the number, industry, and morality of the priesthood and the devotion of the people have been manifestly increased by the total separation of church and state. As to whether or not the United States was ever meant to be a Christian nation, they say our civil compact, the Constitution, is a decidedly secular document and never mentions Christianity. Even the word religious is used only once in Article 6 to ban religious tests for public office. 2 years later, the Bill of Rights starts off, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." This language should dispel any lingering doubt whether America was intended to be a Christian nation when it prevented the federal government from advancing or inhibiting any religious tradition. And that there's a lot more to it. Go see that if you're interested in hearing more. Okay, but what about religious people doing really bad stuff in the name of religion? And let's just focus on the United States, okay? For example, the accidental murder of children based on religion. Those of you who know me know this is kind of a thing with me, right? And then 4th of July, I just read of another case where a kid had pneumonia, decided to do, a little prayer instead of bringing the kid to the doctor, and the child died, right? So it's happening in this country. For example, would you deny a child medical treatment? The example I had before was the father of a 1-year-old daughter who had type 1 diabetes. And he denied her insulin, saying, "Jesus Christ shed blood on the cross to overcome the wages of sin, which are death." How do you deal with these people? You deal with them through the law. Child mortality rates for people who believe in faith healing are 10 times the national average for other children. But the children that survive, sometimes with terrible health outcomes. Okay, I was reading about a girl who had a small hole in her heart when she was a baby. Parents refused to have it fixed. Now she's an adult. She's suing her children. She's suing her parents. Okay, there were simple, available solutions, and when these children grow up, they can sue their parents. must tell the courts and the legislature that this isn't the 19th century anymore. We won't support child abuse in the name of religion. We will prosecute it. Okay? And join with our religious friends in it who are like-minded on this. Okay, what about climate change deniers? I chose that one because I thought there were people in the congregation who were concerned in particular with that. And the correlation between people who are very religious. I wish I had, but I didn't put in here the statistics that basically show the more fundamentalist you are, the more likely you are to deny climate change. But not all conservative Christians are climate change deniers. So I turned to the work of scientist Catherine Hayhoe, who's an evangelical Christian, who works to convince the evangelical community about climate change. This is from an article in The Guardian by Chris Mooney. First, conservation is conservative. The evangelical community isn't just a religious community, it's also more politically active on average. Hayhoe says, what's more conservative than conserving our natural resources and making sure we have enough for the future, not wasting them? That's a conservative value. Many conservatives don't buy into climate science because they don't like big government solutions. They think that liberals, want to impose. Conservative-friendly, individual-focused, market-driven solutions to climate problems are already around us and available. Some religious conservatives say God would never let it happen that we would destroy the world. God wouldn't let human activities ruin creation. As Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma put it, God's still up there. It's the arrogance of people to think that we, human beings, will be able to change what he is doing with the climate. That, to me, is outrageous. But reasonable Christians should explain that Christians believe in free will to make decisions and that God leaves Christians to live with their consequences. Some people believe that, or fear that evangelicals feel that climate change is a sign of the end times. But in the second epistle to the Thessalonians, Paul writes to them and says, you believe the end is near, but you better get on with living your best life today. And so we still would expect people, whether or not they believe these are signs of the end times, you still have to do your part to take care of the world that God has given you. She says she doesn't lie, but she focuses on the part that audiences can absorb. She only talks about the Earth's warming over the last 6,000 years, and she's convinced. She's talking to a young Earth crowd. Okay, because we can talk about the Earth warming without having to debate the age of the Earth. And finally, she talks about the impact a warming Earth has on people and appeals to their desire to help others. So as you can see, there are a lot of reasons why we might want to share atheism with people. We're using atheism here as also sort of synonymous for reason. I did have some good quotes by a guy who says he just wants to be, and he just, expecting a lot that all atheists are creatures of reason. Maybe there's a gap there. At Seattle Atheist Church, we value reason, but that's something we're specifically committed to. So you might want to share a common outlook with people who you care about, or you might want to prevent total strangers from doing bad things in the name of religion. We will accomplish these things by talking to the people who we find are reasonable, and we can reason with them, and by taking legal measures to prevent and even punish people who do irrational things